The murder in room 1046. On Jan 22, 1935, a man calling himself Roland T. Owen checked into the Hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri. He showed up with no luggage. He was described as being 20 to 35 years old, had brown hair, a scar on his scalp visible above the ear, and a case of cauliflower ear. He was nicely dressed in a black coat and received the room key for room 1046. When the maid, Mary Soptic, said Owen allowed her to clean while he was in the room, but asked not to lock the door behind her because his friend was about to visit the room very soon. Soptic said he kept the blinds tightly drawn and the lights off with the exception of one dim lamp. Other staff members who entered the room mentioned that same detail. Soptic also mentioned that Owen was either worried about something or afraid and always wanted to kind of keep in the dark. At 4 p.m., Soptic returned with fresh towels to find Owen laying on the bed completely dressed, in the dark with the door unlocked. She also saw a note that read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." The next morning, Jan 3, Soptic came back to clean the room. She noticed that the door had been locked from the outside and assumed Owen had locked it while he was leaving the room. However, Owen was sitting inside, again with the lights off, which meant that someone else had locked the door from outside the room. When Soptic was cleaning, Owen answered a telephone call and said, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry. I just had breakfast," repeating, "No, I am not hungry." Soptic again arrived later that evening to bring fresh towels and heard 2 male voices coming from inside the room. When she knocked on the door, she heard a rough voice say, "Who is it?" When she explained that she had fresh towels, the voice replied, "We don't need any." During the night, a woman staying in room 1048 would report hearing loud voices, both male and female, cursing on the same floor. There was a party going on that night in room 1055. The next morning, Jan 4, around 7 a.m., the hotel switchboard operator noticed that Owen's phone was off the hook for quite some time without being in use, so she sent the bellboy, Randolph Probst, to go see what was up. Despite the door having a do not disturb sign, Probst knocked several times and heard a voice that said, "Come in, turn on the lights." However, the door was locked and no one was getting up to let the bellboy in. So, after knocking repeatedly, Probst simply said put the phone back on the hook, assuming that Owen was drunk. About an hour and a half later, at around 8:30 a.m., the phone was still off the hook, and another bellboy, Harold Pike, let himself into the room with a passkey. Using only the light from the hall, Pike discovered Owen lying on the bed, naked and assumedly drunk. He also noticed that the bedding was darkened around Owen. The phone stand was kicked down to the ground, so he fixed it and put the phone back into the receiver. From 10:30 to 10:45 a.m., the phone was once again off the receiver. They sent Probst to resolve the situation, and when he opened the door, he saw a truly horrific scene. Probst told the police, "When I entered the room, this man was within 2 feet of the door on his knees and elbows, holding his head in his hands. I saw blood on his head. I then turned the light on. I looked around and saw blood on the walls, on the bed, and in the bathroom. This frightened me and I immediately left the room and went downstairs. Owen had been bound with a cord around his neck, wrists, and ankles. His neck had bruising, suggesting someone had been attempting to strangle him. He had been stabbed more than once in the chest above the heart, and one of the wounds had punctured his lung. Blows to his head had left him with a skull fracture on the right side. In addition to the blood Probst had seen, there was some additional spatter on the ceiling. Dr. Flanders cut the cords from Owen's wrist and asked him who had done this to him. "Nobody," he answered. When then asked what had caused these injuries, Owen said he had fallen and hit his head under the bathtub. The doctor asked if he had been trying to kill himself. After saying no, Owen lost consciousness and was taken to the hospital. He was completely comatose by the time he arrived and died shortly after midnight on Jan 5. Although Owen's true identity was revealed a year and a half later as Artemis Ogletree, no suspects have ever been identified. The Kansas City police continue to investigate. The Axeman of New Orleans. Starting in 1918 and over a period of 18 months, the city of New Orleans was haunted by a serial killer known as the Axeman. The Axeman was the personification of the bogeyman, only attacking at night, and was rumored to be responsible for 12 attacks and 6 deaths. To make this mystery even more chilling, he seemed to only creep on his victims while they slept. Oddly enough, the Axeman never used his own tools and only used what he could find in the victim's house, usually an axe, which he then would leave at the scene of the crime. The majority of the Axeman's victims were Italian immigrants or Italian American, leading many citizens of New Orleans to believe that the crimes were ethnically motivated. Many media outlets drew frenzy from this aspect of the crimes, even suggesting mafia involvement despite the pure lack of evidence. Other crime analysts have suggested that the Axeman killings were related to sex, and that the murderer was perhaps a sadist specifically seeking female victims. Other theories include that the Axeman killed male victims only when they blocked his attempts to murder women, supported by cases in which the woman of a household was murdered, but not the man. A less likely theory is that the serial killer committed the murders in an attempt to promote jazz music, suggested by a letter that the murderer himself was rumored to write, which stated that he would spare the lives of those who played jazz in their homes. The Axeman was never identified, and the murders remain unsolved. The Zodiac Killer. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, a serial killer known as the Zodiac Killer terrorized Northern California. There were at least 5 victims, but later on, the murderer would claim he killed at least 37 people in total. On deck, 1968, on Lake Herman Road in Vallejo, 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen were shot and killed while sitting in a parked car in a gravel parking area. By the time police arrived, Betty was found dead, but David was still alive. Unfortunately, he would die on the way to the hospital. This was the first murder that the Zodiac Killer conducted and got away with. The Zodiac's next crime would happen on July 4, 1969, in Blue Rock Springs Park, only a few minutes away from the previous crime. The Zodiac Killer approached a parked car with a flashlight and then murdered 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 19-year-old Michael Mageau. Both were still alive when found, but only Mageau would survive. He was able to describe the shooter as a young, white male, 26, 30 years old, a stocky build, 200 pounds or larger, about 5'8" with light brown curly hair and a large face. Within an hour, the police received a phone call from someone who claimed to be the shooter and the shooter in the Lake Herman Road murders. On Aug. 1, 1969, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Herald all received a handwritten letter from someone who claimed to be the shooter. The letters revealed specific details about the killings to prove that the writer was indeed the murderer. All the letters were signed with a circle with a cross through it, the symbol that would eventually be known as the mark of the Zodiac Killer. Also included in the letter were 3 different codes that the Zodiac Killer demanded be printed in newspapers, or else he would kill again. The Zodiac Killer said that the cracked codes would reveal his identity. On Aug. 4, 1969, another letter was received that started with the phrase, saying this is the Zodiac speaking, marking the first time the killer referred to himself as the Zodiac. On Aug. 8, the code was cracked by a couple in Salinas, California. The codes read, I like killing because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill. Something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise and those I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for the afterlife. After claiming 3 more lives and causing nationwide terror, the Zodiac Killer wrote his final letter on January 29th of 1974, concluding the letter with a new score. Me equals 37, SFPD equals 0. The true identity of the killer has never been found. The disappearance of D.B. Cooper. On Wednesday, November 24, 1971, a man identified as Daniel Cooper bought a $20 one-way ticket on Northwest Airlines on Flight 305 from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. Cooper was described as being in his mid-40s, wearing a business suit, an overcoat, brown shoes, a white shirt, and a black tie. He also carried a briefcase and a brown paper bag. Before the flight took off, he ordered a bourbon and soda from a flight attendant. After the plane was airborne, Cooper handed the flight attendant a note. At first, she just put it in her pocket without looking at it. But then Cooper told her, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." Cooper then told her the bomb was in his briefcase and asked her to sit next to him. He opened the briefcase to reveal red-colored sticks surrounded by an array of wires. Cooper told the flight attendant to write down everything he was saying and then take it to the captain. The note said, "I want $200,000 by 5 p.m. in cash exclusively in $20 bills, put in a knapsack. I want 2 back parachutes and 2 front parachutes. When we land, I want a fuel truck ready to refuel. No funny stuff or I'll do the job." FBI agents assembled the ransom money from several Seattle area banks, and Seattle police obtained the parachutes from a local skydiving school. When Cooper claimed his demands were met, he allowed all passengers and some of the crew to exit the airplane. Cooper told the remaining crew to refuel the plane and chart a course for Mexico City while staying below 10,000 feet. During the flight, Cooper put on a pair of dark wraparound sunglasses, which would make it into the official sketch and become famous to anyone investigating the case. A little after 8 p.m., and somewhere in between Seattle and Reno, Nevada, Cooper jumped out of the rear door of the plane with 2 of the parachutes and the money. He was never seen again. Despite an expansive manhunt and over 45 years of searching, no conclusions have been made as to the man's identity or his fate after he jumped. It is called one of the greatest cold cases in FBI and U.S. history.